My name is Jesan Sorrells, and this is Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast with my host, my co-host actually, for our very first episode, Colby Sutter. Hello, Colby.
Hey, how are you guys doing?
We're doing quite well, and we're gonna break down some leadership today.
You look beautiful today.
I look beautiful every day, but thank you. Yes, no. Yeah, it's gonna be a good episode. And I arose in the night, I and some few men with me. Neither told I any man what my God had put on my heart to do at Jerusalem. Neither was there any beast with me, save the beast that I rode upon. And I went out by night, by the gate of the valley, even before the dragon well, and to the dung port, and viewed the walls of Jerusalem, which were broken down, and the gates thereof were consumed with fire. Then I went to the gate of the fountain and to the king's pool, but there was no place for the beast that was under me to pass. Then I went up in the night by the brook, and viewed the wall, and turned back, and entered by the gate of the valley, and so returned. And the rulers knew not whither I went or what I did, neither had I as yet told it to the Jews, nor to the priests, nor to the nobles, nor to the rulers, nor to the rest that did the work. Then I said unto them, Ye see the distress we are in, how Jerusalem lieth waste, and the gates thereof are burned with fire. Come, and let us build up the wall of Jerusalem, that we be no more a reproach. I have taught, led, and trained people in leadership and in how to develop as leaders for about the last 15 years. And if I think about it, I've really been leading people all my life. I've also been reading all my life. Those who know me know that I'm a man who, as a child, sat on the floor reading encyclopedias. The old blue leather Mercator encyclopedias were the best ones, and I absorbed lessons from those books. Those who know me also know that I've coached and taught and trained people in everything from martial arts to making fire, and I've learned a ton of things along the way. Leadership, however, what makes a mediocre, a good, or even a bad leader, or even a great leader, well, these are things I have only recently begun to focus on with laser-like intensity, and thus the genesis of this podcast. With the leadership lessons from the great books, I hope that you and I and our co-hosts will discover something new about leadership, at least twice a month, every month, from the great books of the Western canon. Now, I know that there are books that can not only identify but also provide direction from all over the world, but we are starting with books written that underpin Western civilization. Because that's where we live, that's what we're based it in, and whether we like it or not, that's where our assumptions, our thoughts, and our expectations about who and what leaders should be resonate from, without us even considering it too deeply. Mm-hmm. Books such as Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, City of God by Augustine, Don Quixote by Miguel Cervantes, and even Moby Dick by Herman Melville. All of these books basically are the undergirdings of the Western canon, and many, many more. The root of all Western thought on aspects of leadership lies within the great books and has been there even before books about leaders and leadership were exclusively written. As a matter of fact, if we want to think about this historically, books about leadership really only started to be written, within the last 80 years. Particularly when we think about books like Think and Grow Rich, self-help books by Dale Carnegie, and many, many others. So we are starting our podcast series off with the greatest of all the great books, quite frankly, the Bible. And whether you agree with its overall scope and focus or not, whether you agree with the Bible being a place of a transcendental deity, that is actually irrelevant. What's relevant is what we can take from the Bible, what we can take in our learning from the Bible, and what we can apply directly to our lives as leaders. Now, specifically today, we're going to delve into the book of Nehemiah, and we're going to talk about how this guy, who I talked about in the opening, who was riding a donkey around the dung walls of Jerusalem, how this guy Nehemiah, the son of Hakaliah, and yes, we're going to talk about those biblical names and we're going to pronounce them, and I'm going to try to round my mouth around them because they're not easy, led his people, specifically the Jewish people, to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem, which had been broken down by invaders.
Nehemiah is one of my favorite books, Jesan, and I can't wait to be a part of this podcast with you. I love the book of Nehemiah because it has this in-depth richness of leadership, but yet also compassion and love. So as you said, either if you agree with the Bible or disagree with the Bible, we can all find leadership skills and life skills in the book of Nehemiah and how he went and rebuilt the wall. I don't want to give away too much yet, so I'm going to turn it back over to you so we can start talking about the book before I get ahead of myself.
Well, and we're going to read big chunks of this book, right? Like this is one of the things that I want to be clear with folks. And this podcast format is modeled, and I would be bereft if I didn't say this, it's modeled off of Jocko Willick's podcast, the Jocko podcast, where he reads big chunks of books and then talks about them for 2-3 hours at a time, or has a guest on and talks about a book that was written and then, deals with that, and talks about that for a long period of time. Look, this podcast is designed to have conversations about leadership. It's designed to have riffing. It's designed to have back and forth. And Colby and myself both have two different styles, but we both have a passion for leadership. We both may approach it differently. We both may think about it from different angles, but we have a passion for it. Yeah.
I probably think of it better than you do, just because it's me. I get it.
Well, you know what? We're gonna see just how much better it is, and we're gonna let the listeners take the Taster's Choice test on that.
Yeah, there we go. All right.
I'll take the Pepsi challenge. Yeah, I'll go right on ahead and jump right on in that.
I was bluffing.
Well, one of the things that I want to start off with is getting some of our legs underneath us around Nehemiah. And so I want to pull from the Blue Letter Bible's Strong Concordance reference. And if you don't know what Strong's Concordance is, it doesn't matter. But basically what it is it's a combination of an encyclopedia and a thesaurus and a translation volume for the Bible. And it's usually divided into two sections. One in Hebrew for the Old Testament and discovering the meaning and the depth of Old Testament words. And then one section that's for Greek, because the New Testament was written in Greek. And if you want to find out more about that, you can go check out blueletterbible.com yourself. And I want to give them immense shout outs right now. I probably could not have written this episode without their help. And so they are a great resource. And the Bible is a book that annotates itself. And so when you read through the book of Nehemiah, and some of you may be Bible scholars who are out there, and you may be thinking, is he going to get biblical? I'll get a little biblical as we talk and as we riff, and I can't really help getting a little bit biblical because, Colby is a reverend in his real life, and, he gets biblical. But as leaders, we don't have to get biblical. We just have to know what the great books say. And we have to acknowledge it, and we have to take it seriously. And Strong's allows us to do that because now we actually understand what the meaning of words are behind the words that are used. So when the word excellence is used in the Old Testament, it means a different thing than maybe the way that we think about it in the 21st century. with our English language, right? The word love. Love is an interesting word in the English language. We have one word that covers a multitude of sins. I've said this before in trainings and in development work that I've done with organizations. But when you talk about the word love in a Hebrew context, or even in a Greek context, there's multiple different definitions for love, and there's multiple different ways that love is defined. So anyway, let's go back to the book for just a second, or the Strong's Concordance. So Nehemiah's name means Jehovah comforts. He was the son of Hakaliah, cupbearer to King Artaxerxes. And by the way, that's a great name. I'm going to say it as many times as I possibly can. Artaxerxes. That's back when you gave your kids really awesome names that you couldn't do anything with that name Artaxerxes other than be a king. That's it. That's the only job that you have. You're not going to be a janitor named Artaxerxes. It's not going to happen. Who became governor of Judah after the return from exile. And he was one of the 12 heads of the people who returned from exile with Zerubbabel, again, another great name, son of Azbuk, again, another great name, and ruler of the half part of Beth Zur, who helped repair the wall of Jerusalem. Now, it turns out back in the day that walls mattered, just as now to people. Conversations about walls are nothing new, And so back in the day, if you did not have walls to protect yourself, to fortress yourself off from invaders, from people who wanted to take your stuff, from people who wanted to, let's be blunt here, because as leaders, we need to be blunt sometimes. We need to be clear and candid and courageous, who wanted to rape and pillage. You had to actually maintain the walls. And by the way, this is the first lesson for leaders. Sometimes you have to maintain boundaries.
Yes.
Good. I love about good neighbors. Yeah, go ahead. No.
Yeah. What I love about the book of Nehemiah too is what you're saying is during this exile, they've already rebuilt the temple, and then they started to rebuild the people spiritually. And then Nehemiah comes along to protect the people, if you will. He comes and he has this desire to build this wall to protect the people. So I can't wait to dive into this book even more. When you were saying that, I just got excited too, because I wanted to chime in real fast that I live my life by this concept of the Jewish people used to teach. It's a Hebrew concept, and it's the wrestle with God, which Israel really means. Right. I think we all need to, as leaders and just followers of the Bible, or not even if you don't know what you believe, we all have to wrestle with what we think and what we believe so we can come to our own understanding and knowledge.
And the wrestling with God was what Jacob did after he, watched the angels come down and go up of Jacob's ladder, and he wrestled, right? And then, he wrestled all night with God. Well, some folks think it's Jesus, but whatever. Wrestled all night with God, and then his thigh was taken out, and he walked with a limp, for the remainder of his life.
I call it a gangster lean.
Gangster lean. Gangster lean. I've often thought, I'm going to say the first outrageous thing on this 2-hour podcast. We are now probably about 15 minutes in. I'm going to say the first outrageous thing. I think the drug dealers should probably be teaching at business schools.
I agree. That's all we're going to say on that one. I agree.
That's all we're going to say on that one. It's not. And by the way, they should be sentenced to teach at Stanford Business School. It's not a get out of jail free card. Don't get me wrong. No. They're actually going to put in work. I've designed syllabuses. I've taught students. It's a sentence sometimes. And sometimes it feels like that.
Yeah. But I've written programs and taught too, and it is torture. So it's a good torture system.
It's a good torture system, right? You got to go through it. And now we've abandoned our entire higher education audience. So this is good. All right. Right off the bat. Back to Nehemiah. Let's start with Nehemiah 1, 2 through 4. So back to Nehemiah. The words of Nehemiah, the son of Hakaliah. And it came to pass in the month of Chislew, in the 20th year, as I was in Shushan, the palace, that Hanani, one of my brethren, came, he and certain men of Judah. And I asked them concerning the Jews that had escaped, which were left of the captivity, and concerning Jerusalem. And they said unto me, the remnant that are left of the captivity there in the province are in great affliction and reproach. The wall of Jerusalem is also broken down, and the gates thereof are burned with fire. And it came to pass when I heard these words that I sat down and wept and mourned certain days and fasted and prayed before the God of heaven. A couple of big points here for leaders. And Colby, you can jump in at any point, but a couple of big points here for leaders. Look at what Nehemiah actually did. He got a bad report. Everything's sucking, right? Hananiah comes along. He's like, listen, old boy, things are terrible over here. I understand you're like up in the king's court. I understand you're the cupbearer. By the way, back in the day, the cupbearer, and those of you who don't know, the cupbearer was like a really important role because the cupbearer was the person who basically prevented the king from dying. I'm going to taste your food. I'm going to drink your wine. I'm going to make sure you're not poisoned, because everybody in the king's court was trying to poison Artaxerxes. And so he needed a cupbearer. So this wasn't a, I'm the janitor pushing the broom kind of role. This wasn't that. This was, I'm the executive vice president of ExxonMobil. I make $100,000 a month. Here's what I care about if I'm Nehemiah. I care about always being right, because if I'm wrong, I'm dead. That's the role that Nehemiah was in. Is that a correct, maybe, categorization of that?
It's a great generalization of the cupbearer, as you just said, was the people that would test out to see if the king's food was poisoned. They would drink out of their cup to see if it was poisoned. It was an extremely important role. And Nehemiah was seen from the king and other people as a leader and a person in great authority because of that position.
Right. And we have...
one thing I just wanted to quick point out, because I wanted to point out of a good leader before you steal it from me, because you might. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to sound smart for a second. What I love about Nehemiah is when he hears this report, what does he do? He weeps and prays on it. This shows us the heart of a leader. He's compassionate towards other people. Nehemiah didn't supposedly even know these people because he's been in captivity his whole life. These were just his family's family members in his hometown, but he had such compassion for the people. He actually wept and prayed on this issue for days before he took action. So to me, that's the heart of a leader, is putting other people before yourself.
And Nehemiah wasn't, historically speaking, in the context of the biblical context, he wasn't Moses, right? He wasn't Abraham. Those people at the time that the book of Nehemiah was written, which is paired with the book of Ezra, which we're not going to get into today, like at all. Maybe in a future podcast we will. But those individuals, Nehemiah and his buddies like Hananiah and his father Zerubbabel and all these other kinds of folks, right? Not Zerubbabel, but Hakaliah. Though all those folks, they talked about Moses and Abraham the same way we talk about George Washington. Or Abraham Lincoln, right? It was as far away from them as Abraham Lincoln is to us. Like if they could have built, and they probably did, but if they could have built a statue to Moses, they would have. Except, they're Jews, so they're not going to do that. Instead, they're going to build calves and get in trouble in other kind of ways throughout the Old Testament.
It falls into the adultery, having idols. But I know what you mean.
Idols and Baal and all that, So you could have all those kinds of problems. But the point is, like for Nehemiah, those individuals, those experiences were historical. They weren't his contemporary experiences. And so being a cupbearer, he was living his life. He was just hanging out, living his life, doing what guys do, doing what leaders do. And as I said before, the parallel to today is, being an executive at Exxon, making $100,000 a month and never being wrong. And by the way, he had the 445 BC version of a BMW. And it's never talked about in Nehemiah, but I'm sure he had wives, not just one, but multiple wives. I'm sure he had property. I'm sure he had possessions. I'm sure he had all of that, because that's how you were set up back in the day if the king really liked you.
Yep. I just was thinking too, this is what's fascinating about Nehemiah, besides his multiple wives and big houses and mansions and Escalades, is it's equivalent almost to, so my people are from Ireland. My grandma was first generation from Ireland. So it'd be almost equivalent to me hearing something that's happening in Ireland this day in my age and weeping over it. It wouldn't happen and for me, and I wish it would. So I'm saying Nehemiah is such a good leader. He's hearing the story of a place he's never been to, about a people he doesn't even really know personally, and he just weeps and has compassion for these people. I think we can all even just learn from that Nehemiah, this person of great authority, falls to his knees when it comes to the hurting of his people.
And the other thing that's sometimes neglected in this first part of Nehemiah, again, Nehemiah 1, 2 through 4, right? There's so much packed in this book, by the way. I mean, if you go and read the book, it seems short. There's only, 15 chapters in Nehemiah. It seems short. And again, it's packed in between Ezra and Esther. So if you're going and you're finding that old Bible that you've used for, a marker or for a family, heirloom or something like that, and you're cracking it open, or you're going on the internet because you don't know what I'm talking about right now, or you're trying to follow along, please do that. I encourage you to do that as a leader. But when you look at what's inside of just these first sentences, there's so much packed in here for leaders. And one of the big ones that I take away is that Nehemiah cleaned himself out. We don't talk a lot about prayer, and we're not going to talk about that in this podcast necessarily. This episode, we might hit that another time. We're going to talk about Augustine and some other things. Maybe we'll talk about Thomas Aquinas. We're going to get into prayer. We're going to talk about, how do you right yourself as a leader spiritually with being in the Kierkegaardian sense of being. Anyway, he fasted and prayed. He prepped himself. He cleaned himself out so that he could take things in. And I'm sure the fasting and praying wasn't just, I'm just going to miss a few meals and get on my knees a couple of times and say some prayers and then go about my day. That's not what Daniel did much later on. That's not what the prophets did. That's not even what David did when David was, as a leader, was accused by Nathan of basically engaging in murder and adultery and creating a child out of wedlock and all these other kinds of things. And David was interesting. David was a man after God's own heart. And so Nehemiah had to get his heart right. And that's really what I take from this. He had to get his heart right before he could lead the people. And so for leaders, this is the first bomb I would drop. Leaders have to get their hearts right before they can lead other people. They have to be intentional about doing that. And don't worry, we're going to get into like how you handle followers, because there's a lot of information about followers in here. And we're also going to talk about how you handle enemies, because it isn't just about how you get yourself right, because there's a whole bunch of other people who don't want you to get yourself right. Back to the book. And it came to pass when I heard these words that I sat down and wept and mourned certain days and fasted and prayed before the God of heaven. And I said, I beseech thee, O Lord God of heaven, the great and terrible God, that keepeth covenant and mercy for them that love him and observe his commandments. By the way, I'm reading from the King James Version because I like the these and thous and those, because I like the theatrical Shakespearean language. You don't have to read from this. You can read the New Living Translation. You can read any translation you want. And the language will be a little bit different, but you can read any translation you want. All those are good. Let thine ear now be attentive and thine eyes open, that thou mayest hear the prayer of thy servant, which I pray before thee now, day and night, for the children of Israel, thy servants, and confess the sins of the children of Israel, which we have sinned against thee. Both I and my father's house have sinned. By the way, let me pause there for just a second. He wasn't just cleaning himself out. He was asking for repentance and reconciliation for his people as well, which is something that's also interesting for leaders. You don't just stand in the gap for yourself. You stand in the gap for a whole bunch of other people. And even if you're just leading in your family, let's say you're the head of household, not just on your taxes, but you're the actual head of household, right? You stand in the gap for your family. You stand in the gap for your community. You stand in the gap at your workplace. It's a big responsibility to be a leader, and too many leaders tend to not think about it that way, particularly positional leaders. So if there are any managers and supervisors listening to this podcast right now, hoping to glean some insights, that's a big one right there. You stand in the gap, not just for your family, not just for the position you're in, but for everybody that surrounds you. Back to Nehemiah. We have dealt very corruptly against thee. He's continuing his prayer. We have dealt very corruptly against thee, and have not kept the commandments, nor the statutes, nor the judgments, which thou commandest thy servant Moses. Remember, I beseech thee, the word that thou commandest thy servant Moses, saying, if ye transgress, I will scatter you abroad among the nations. But if you turn unto me and keep my commandments and do them, though there were of you cast out unto the uttermost part of heaven, yet will I gather them from thence and will bring them unto the place that I have chosen to set my name there. Now these are thy servants and thy people whom thou hast redeemed by thy great power and by thy strong hand. O Lord, I beseech thee, let now thine ear be attentive to the prayer of thy servant and to the prayer of thy servants who desire to fear thy name. And prosper, I pray thee, thy servant this day, and grant him mercy in the sight of this man. And then he closes it by saying, for I was the king's cupbearer. A couple of different points here to make. And Colby, you could jump in at any point, but a couple of different points here to make that jump out from that long section. And again, that's Nehemiah chapter 1, 4 through 11 we just read. A couple of big points there. Actually, 3 big points specifically. Leaders need to align their hearts and their character with the work they seek to accomplish. If you align your heart and you align your character with the work you seek to accomplish, you will have success. You can manage without alignment, and you can supervise work that other people are doing without alignment. But fundamentally, I don't believe, and I think Colby would agree with me, I don't believe you can lead without alignment. Managing is different. It has aspects of leadership, but it's not purely leadership. And supervision, quite frankly, supervision is about the day-to-day. It's about putting out fires. It's about making sure the entire walls don't burn down on a day-to-day basis. It's maintenance. And don't get me wrong, there are acts of leadership inside of supervision. There are acts of leadership inside of management. But those acts in and of themselves are not pure leadership. If you want to be a pure leader, you have to align your heart and your character with the work you seek to accomplish. And that'll start you down the path towards that. Yeah.
I think just to chime in on that 100% is a good leader needs to find out what their character is and what they believe and then align themselves with that. I think anyone that follows a leader knows their heart, their leader's heart, because we reveal our hearts through the way we talk and how we act, and the people that are following us see that. So if your character is not aligned, your followers will see that, and you won't have dedicated people following you. You won't be leading dedicated people.
And there's a moment where this old boy has to deal with his followers, right? We go to chapter 5, and he talks about, in chapter 5 of the book, he talks about usury, and he talks about the taxes, and because the people working on the wall basically they basically sacrificed, not a physical sacrifice, but they basically sacrificed their sons and daughters, their fields, their vineyards to go out and build this wall. And it was Nehemiah's own people that were taxing the people who were building the wall to protect everybody. And so it wasn't just about getting aligned with the work. Then Nehemiah had the much bigger issue, which is again an issue of leadership, of aligning himself with the people, and then aligning the people to the organization and to the work. Actually, not even the organization and the work, aligning the people to the work, and then aligning the people and the team and the work to the organization. And so one of the other principles for leaders, which I didn't really write down, but Colby sort of triggered it in my head, is this idea of scale. Scale sometimes defeats leaders. So I think you probably agree with me, Colby. It's easy to lead 2 people.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Like, that's fairly simple. I mean, you've had a coffee business. It's fairly simple to lead a couple people, right?
Yep. It's actually a lot easier. I'd rather lead 2 people than 200.
yeah. And some of us aren't built for scale. I mean, I've decided 50 is probably about my sweet spot.
Yep.
I don't want to be a CEO of a big public company. I don't want that. And I've looked at those jobs. I've seen those positions. I have an understanding of what goes into those kinds of roles and what you have to sacrifice in order to make those kinds of roles actually work. And it's a lot. If you're leading a multinational corporation with 100,000 employees, you've got problems that are just unbelievable, and they're all based on scale. And if you didn't get good leadership training, let's say you started a tech company in your Harvard dorm room. If you didn't get good leadership training, you might run into some problems later on because scale defeats you.
alignment problems.
Massive alignment, misalignment all over the place, which of course makes it easy for folks like myself who do consulting and coaching and teaching and training work, because that's how we get paid. If you'd like to have us come into your organization, please visit us on hsconsultingandtraining.com, and you can sign up for one of our webinars or one of our training opportunities. Or even you could do private coaching with me, and I do private consulting as well with your organization. And a lot of what we do in those consulting gigs, a lot of what we do in those kinds of environments, and I can't talk about all, I'll pull some examples as we go throughout the remainder of this podcast, but a lot of the problems are about misalignment. The leaders are aligned to one thing. The followers are aligned to something else. The organizational structure is aligned to this amorphous idea of mission, vision, values, and goals. But then you talk to the people who actually work there, and they don't even know what the heck those things are.
Yeah.
So alignment is huge. Leaders must be aligned. The second point that I'd like to make is leaders acknowledge current reality with all of its problems, but they don't complain about it. They don't rant about it and rave about it. And they don't even, this is a big one I see, they don't even lament the state or the present fact of current reality. Leaders put their shoulder in and they start the work. Yeah, okay, it sucks. We just lost $1 billion in the stock market. Yeah, it sucks. COVID-19 came along and ripped the heck out of our business model, and we're 2 days away from going out of business. Yeah, it sucks. The state has shut down our economy. Any state, you can pick which any state you want. The state has shut down our economy, and we run a restaurant, and we don't know how we're going to survive. It's at those moments, and those are big crisis moments I've mentioned that are recent in the public imagination, but you can have small crisis moments, like my entire team that worked on a project that needed to be delivered tomorrow just quit because they hated me. Or I get a report of somebody not finishing the work, and by the way, it's due at midnight and it's 11:30 and I'm getting ready to go to bed. Who's going to do that? Leaders lead. Leaders acknowledge the current reality. So leaders look at those realities, both small and large, and they go, yeah, that sucks. How do we fix it?
You made me think real fast, and this will be really quick. I'm a storyteller, so I teach through telling stories.
Tell a story. Take your time. We got plenty of time here.
It's a very small story, but it's just an example of a great leader. I written and designed programs that public schools have picked up. So case in point, there's a school out here in Syracuse called Fowler High School, and I wrote a drug education program, and the school picked it up. So I came in there to do case management and teach this program to the students. I say that to say the principal of the school was one of the best leaders I ever met in my life, because he would get in the dirt and do work with you. He came beside you, just like you're talking about, and would do it with you. And he never just told people what to do in this instance. I know all leadership's different, but he would do it with you. So whenever you talk to anyone, the common theme was this. His name was Matt Williams. Was if Matt Williams told me to go clean the basement because it was flooded with raw sewage and I knew that wasn't my job, I would go do that because I know he would be right beside me doing it with me. So a little graphic example of the raw sewage, but my case in point is through this story, I believe it shows you what a good leader does, kind of what Jesan you're talking about right now, is this leaders do the work and people follow those type of leaders.
I'm not getting down there with raw sewage. I'll be honest. I'm like, that's probably my limit.
I wouldn't either, but that's what his staff members said. I wasn't a staff member, I was a contract worker.
Right. Yeah. But even there, like, you knew as a contract worker that the leader had the character, and this is really what we're talking about, had the character to literally get down in the muck with you, literally like jump into that thing, right? And the best leaders, and by the way, this has nothing to do with education. This has to do with character. I don't care about your education. You could be a PhD and have poor character. You could be.
He was a PhD, just a side note. LOL.
Right. So you could be a PhD and have great character.
His name was Dr. Matt Williams, my bad.
Great.
Let me take that back.
Cool. Not a medical doctor, but a doctor. Okay, cool. All right. I'm not going to take away his thesis writing, which was probably like walking through sewage for like 7 years if we really had him honestly and off the mic. No, I'm sure he enjoyed all of it. The point is, you have to engage with folks, and it's the acts of character in acknowledging whatever the reality is. And again, without ranting, raving, complaining, lamenting, just saying, yes, this is the reality. The sewer line is broken. Somebody's got to go fix it. Who's up? I raise my hand. I am. I made this. That's the courage part of being a leader. And Nehemiah had that. He had that, and it was reflected in his prayer, when he talks about how the people have been moved, and he harkens back to Moses, so he's tying it to historical things, right? The people have been moved in this way. I mean, it's 445 BC. The Jews are scattered all over the place. Israel and Judah have had a series of bad kings, and by bad I mean, if you want to see like the bad leadership, go read Chronicles and First and Second Chronicles and First and Second Kings. My God, like post Solomon, everything goes in the toilet. And by the way, Israel and Judah always repent. Well, not always, but they sometimes repent and they come back, or it goes on for 2 or 3 generations, and then the Lord just, boom, or circumstances, if you're an atheist or an agnostic, just whacks the patootie out of them, and then they come back and they try again, right? And so there's examples of quite frankly, piss poor leadership, people who are more interested in position than in actual leadership, that had occurred before Nehemiah. And he still harkens back to Moses. And by the way, we see this later on in Nehemiah, when they dedicate Jerusalem and they dedicate the wall. And Ezra comes out, reads from the book of Ezra, and talks about how Moses led us out of Egypt, or not Moses, yes, Moses led us out of Egypt, Abraham, harkening back to all these patriarchs, which again, were the ways in which we talk about George Washington or Abraham Lincoln. Or if you're in another country, your revolutionary or leaders of old time, right? If you're in England, kings and princes. If you're in Japan, emperors, right? If you're in Brazil, it might be past presidents or prime ministers, right? I don't care. It's people in the past, right, who were these great leaders, and he's tying it to that because he's trying to bring their character forward so that his people can see that character. Last point. Leaders have humility. That's very simple. You can clip that. And not fake humility either. Not pretend humility. Not, oh, yeah, that was really terrible. And then they're going and sucking up all the credit they can possibly, suck up. Or I did a really good job. That was really cool. Or ooh, that was really hard. No, they're not doing that, right? They're not engaged in that way. Leaders have humility. They check their egos, which got that from quite frankly, from Jocko Willink, and it's absolutely true. They check their egos, and this is what Nehemiah was seeking to do in his prayer. This is what he was seeking to do through fasting. This is what he was seeking to do through preparing to go into the breach here. They acknowledge that they may not have all the answers and all the solutions, or even all the energy, that's a big one, to solve every problem with which they're faced. So Colby, in your example, I don't know that you would have the energy to jump down in the sewer, as a contract worker, right? Because your position says, I'm just here from like 8 to 2, or I'm just designing this one piece for you and then I'm going away. But a leader shows you that, yeah, I don't have the energy to solve that problem that you were hired to solve, but I at least understand it enough to be able to know that I have to give that energy to you. That way you can go forward with it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And I agree with that. I think, as leaders and just as people in general, we can't fix every single problem ourselves or have the energy to engage in every single problem, but it's the effect of just acknowledging that it's there and understanding that it's there and making, acknowledging that. I think what I just wanted to say from the first chapter of Nehemiah, what my biggest takeaway as a leader and just as a person, so this goes for any leader out there listening and any just person who's a person, get it? person. That's a person. Anyway, this is
Person,
what
yeah.
I get from it.
You, a human being, not the aliens.
Yes, yes. Lil Wayne is not listening.
No.
For you who don't know, he calls himself an alien. Just had to clear that up. Is this Nehemiah? What did he do when the people came? And we're telling him about the problem? What did Nehemiah do? It's very obvious, and I think a lot of us miss this as people and as leaders. Is he listened? I think so many times we don't just listen to people, especially as leaders. We think we know the solutions. We think we know where we're going, and a lot of times we do. But if we don't stop and listen to other people, we'll never know the hearts of the people that are following us or the situations that are truly going on, and we won't be able to fix the things that we need to fix in our organizations and our companies, and even in our relationships as just people. We need to, I think, listen a lot more as leaders. Leaders should be slow to speak and quick to listen.
How is listening different than hearing?
It's not. No, I'm kidding. So hearing is, I think another great story or illustration would be this. Someone's talking and hearing is kind of going, yeah, or that would be listening, my bad. Listening is kind of just like, yeah, okay. You're not really hearing them. Hearing someone is, I believe, you can either argue either side of it, but to me, hearing is hearing someone's heart, hearing the issue, being sympathetic and understanding what the person's saying, not just giving lip service and letting someone speak and not really paying attention, listening to their emotion and what's behind what they're saying. I think one of my number one biggest qualities, and I agree with your humble heart, so I'm not trying to be trying to brag here. I'm staying humble. One of my number one biggest qualities, or maybe I would even say passions, is I don't care what someone's saying as much. This is just my nature. It's who I am. I want to know why you're saying it. So that's the difference to me between listening and hearing is, why are you saying what you're saying? Not so much what are you saying, because the why gets us to the root of the problem. The why gets us to the heart of the issue. So to me, that's the difference between just listening and hearing.
And I'll riff on that again. I mean, Simon Sinek, talks about knowing your why. Keith Ferrazzi, Leaders Eat Last, all these kind of, ideas and concepts of books have been written around and trainings have been done. And that's all very interesting in the abstract. In the practical, why don't leaders listen? Why don't they hear? And a lot of it has to do with that scale issue. That's part of it. A lot of it also has to do with time, feeling as though they have a lack of time, feeling as though they are rushed, feeling as though they are being pushed into a corner to make a decision immediately. I lay a lot of that at the feet of a lack of intentionality. I'm building an idea around this, not just with this podcast, but with a lot of other things that I do. The intentionality is the one thing, and I don't care if you're a servant leader or a trait leader or any of these other fancy leadership theories, of which there are like 8 to 12 of them. I don't care about any of those. Are you thinking as a leader? Are you thinking while you're listening? Are you thinking while you're hearing? Are you thinking while you're engaging? Is your brain actually turned on, right? It can be turned on, by the way, and be silent. That's okay. It doesn't have to yell at you. But are you actually engaging? Are you actually thinking? Are you actually being intentional? And I think part of what you're talking about, what I'm hearing, and part of what you're talking about is hearing, and what you're talking about is this idea of trying to figure out what is at the heart of the problem, what's at the heart of, not even a problem, but what's at the heart of the followers, what's in the heart of the situation, right? And then having the humility to go, okay, well, I can't solve that, so I'm going to bring in someone who can.
Yep.
Or I'm going to empower these people to do that.
I agree. And I think, and let me make it clear too, I know a lot of CEOs of multi-million-dollar companies, and I know a lot of people who run small companies, and it's hard to listen to everyone. I understand that completely, because we're busy and we get engaged in life and we can't listen to everyone's problems or issues or whatever it is. But I think a lot of it is when we do, I love what you just said, it's about being intentional and being proactive. It's almost kind of like being intentional in our relationships. I think we might not even have the solution to a problem when we listen, but I know myself, just being heard helps. Even if there is no solution, just being heard helps, and that builds this bond between leaders and followers when they just know that they're heard and their voice matters.
Exactly. I'd agree with that. Back to Nehemiah, chapter 2, 1-7. Again, from the King James Bible. I'm going to read from this. And it came to pass in the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of Artaxerxes the king, that wine was before him. And I took up the wine and gave it unto the king. Now I had not been before time sad in his presence. Wherefore the king said unto me, why is thy countenance sad, seeing thou art not sick? There is nothing else but sorrow of heart. Then I was very sore afraid, and said unto the king, let the king live forever. Why should my countenance be sad, when the city, the place of my father's sepulchres, lieth waste, and the gates thereof are consumed with fire? Then the king said unto me, for what dost thou make request? So I prayed to the God of heaven. And I said unto the king, if it please the king, and if thy servant have found favor in thy sight, that thou wouldst send me unto Judah, unto the city of my father's sepulchres, that I may build it. And the king said unto me, the queen also sitting by him, for how long shall thy journey be? And when wilt thou return? So it pleased the king to send me, and I set him a time. Moreover, I said unto the king, if it please the king, let letters be given me to the governors beyond the river, that they may convey me over till I come into Judah. Sometimes you need allies. Sometimes leaders can't get anywhere without allies. That's a big takeaway from that chunk. The other big takeaway is this. Sometimes your allies need to have their ego stroked. Nehemiah was talking to King Artaxerxes. He was talking to his boss, right? And he's saying, let the king live forever. That's the ego stroke if I ever heard one. Why should not my countenance be sad, when the city, the place of my father's sepulchres, lies waste, and the gates thereof are consumed with fire? He also says, he was sore afraid when the king spoke to him. How many leaders have bosses? How many leaders are, if we're going to take from ideas around power and dominance and hierarchy, how many leaders serve other leaders in the hierarchy, right? And they serve these other leaders in the hierarchy, and they have to make those leaders feel good to get anything done. I hear this all the time. Managers who will tell me, hey, son, these are all great things you're telling me in this training, or hey, son, these are all great things you're writing on this blog post, or hey, son, these are all great things you got in this podcast, but I got a boss, and you don't know how my boss is. My boss doesn't care, which is the name of my second book. You can get it on Amazon. My boss doesn't care about any of this. What do I do? And I tell them, sometimes you got to stroke your boss's ego. Sometimes you got to have humility, and you got to be like, listen, you're a great dude. Hey, the last idea you came up with in that last meeting, that was awesome, even though you might have thought internally that was terrible, and why did we do that? Doesn't matter. And the reason why he's doing this is to get the letters, which will allow him passage across the river. He's basically buying permission. He's getting a passport to leave. Now, would Nehemiah have left without that permission? I absolutely believe yes, he would have. But it would not nearly have been as successful. And later on in Nehemiah, you see, particularly in chapters 6, I believe, and 8, where he has to return back to Artaxerxes, he would not have been accepted back at the court. And remember, again, he was a cupbearer. He was, the executive vice president of Artaxerxes' court. And he still had to go somewhere to ask permission. Bob Dylan had a great line in a song many, many years ago. He said, everybody's going to serve somebody, from the homeless man on the street, and I'm paraphrasing now, from the homeless man on the street to the Pope in Rome. Everybody got to serve somebody. And even leaders have to serve somebody. And if they don't, if they're not necessarily, if they're at the top of the hierarchy, that's great. But even at the top of the hierarchy, there's something above you. That's what I believe. Anyway, there's a transcendental deity above you. You're going to serve somebody. So leaders have to be aware of this, I believe. And that's a big takeaway from this chunk. King Artaxerxes was a real historical fellow. People often don't think that he was. He was a real historical fellow. So there's some real historical basis to this. He reigned in Persia. And he's actually mentioned in the book of Ezra several times. And I got this information from a theological primer for the study of Nehemiah by Martin Bremer. This is actually a really good quote. Ezra, under the authorization of King Artaxerxes, leads the return of a second group of exiles to Jerusalem in 458 BC. In addition, Ezra is commissioned by King Artaxerxes to teach God's law to the Jews. In the third section, Nehemiah 1 through 7 and 3, Nehemiah is commissioned by the same King Artaxerxes to return to Jerusalem and reconstruct the walls of the city. So this guy Artaxerxes was helping the Jews out consistently. Why would he do that? Well, partially because it politically benefited him. Why would your boss help you? Because sometimes it politically benefits him to do so. It allows him to get over on a competitor. Like right now, Artaxerxes in this example was seeking to get over, I believe, over Darius, if I remember correctly. My history is correct. And those of you who are historians, you can come back at me and correct me on this. But he was seeking to get over on his enemies. And so, of course, he was going to let the Jews go back and build the wall. Of course, he was going to let Nehemiah go back. But he still wanted his ego stroked. He still wanted somebody to come to him and ask him permission. He still wanted someone to honor his position in the hierarchy. Leaders sometimes have to honor people's positions in the hierarchy, even though it makes it fun for us.
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in real fast on the leadership stroking. Is I talk to my nephews and nieces a lot, and they're teenagers, and I'm the uncle that they always come to for advice, especially when they're fighting with their parents. And I say that to say, I tell them the same thing that I tell people who have bosses and have to stroke egos is sometimes you just got to play the game. You know, you might disagree 100%. You might not even like the person you're working with, but sometimes you just got to smile and play the game.
That's right. And by the way, you have to know what game you're playing.
Yes.
This goes along with the intentionality thing. Nehemiah wasn't saying anything to Artaxerxes that was unintentional. He was trying to get permission to go over the river, to get on the donkey and go check out the walls. The section that we opened with occurs after this, right? He was trying to get a way that I heard another individual explain this, who had also broken down Nehemiah back in the day. He was trying to get basically Artaxerxes' charge card. He was trying to get funded, you know? So it wasn't just the intangible of permission, because sometimes those people in the hierarchy, they hold the purse strings on the budget. You're talking about somebody's parents. If you're 15 and you have no job and no source of income, you better show respect to the hierarchy. Like this,
better play the game.
You better play the game, and you better know what game you're in. And yes, I will say the appropriate postmodern thing, which is, yes, there are some situations where you don't want to play the game. Yes, there are some situations where it's abusive. Yes, there are some situations where it's based in power and dominance. Yes, and yes, and yes, and yes, and yes, and doesn't negate anything that I just said, which is sometimes you have to play the game.
Yep.
But you have to know what game you're playing. And that allows leaders to make decisions. So let's talk, I want to riff a little bit about self-employed folks, because some of our folks listening might be self-employed, might be entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs are wired, and Colby's an entrepreneur, I'm an entrepreneur. Entrepreneurs are wired to not play the traditional game. I call it poker and chess lessons, right? And wrote a whole blog post about this that you can check out on my website. But there's lessons you can learn from poker that apply to entrepreneurship, and there's lessons you can learn from chess. And you have to combine both of those lessons together to get anywhere. And the lessons you learn from poker are how many times to put down a bet at a table where you may be losing every single time until you put down a bet that actually hits. And do you have enough chips as they keep going down and going down and going down and going down and going down to keep making bets at that table? And then once you've run out of chips, or once you've won at the table, you don't have to stay there anymore. This is the lesson from poker. You can pick up your chips and go to another table and start playing again. That's the poker lessons. The chess lesson is strategy. You do not win a chess game by being unintentional. You have to think 4 to 5 moves ahead of your opponent. You have to know what your opponent is going to do before your opponent knows what they're going to do. This is why Kasparov has such problems with Deep Blue, right? Not because Deep Blue is a pure program is better than a human being at chess. There's some interesting speculation around that. But it's because the computer can do mathematical equations faster than a human being can do. That's the only thing. It's speed. It's speed and equations. That's it. That's the only difference. So what does an entrepreneur learn from chess? Well, you're not playing against Deep Blue. If I'm trying to sell coffee, if I'm Colby and I'm trying to sell coffee to a local coffee roaster who doesn't want to buy my coffee and has their own beans and is like, why are you here? Who are you? You're playing a poker game at that point, but you're also combining it with a chess game inside. And this is what Nehemiah understood about Artaxerxes. And by the way, this is what Artaxerxes understood at a larger organizational level in the game that he was playing against kings and emperors that were in other areas.
And, just to capitalize on that, because as soon as you start talking about entrepreneurship, I get going because I have 3 different businesses that I've started and run, and I just love entrepreneurship. The key thing about its leadership, entrepreneurship, and Nehemiah is you sit and you plan and you strategize. It's exactly like you just said, chess and poker combined. Nehemiah knew what he wanted. He knew what he needed to get permission for, and then he buttered up the king, if you will, to get what he needed. Jesan's example of going into a coffee roaster who already roast coffee, me trying to sell them my coffee, that would be almost poor planning on my part if I went in there and done that. I would have had to sit back, re-strategize who I want to target, what I want to target, and then go target them. I think a lot of leaders and just entrepreneurs, the strategy and the self-reflection and the thinking is what really separates us from others.
Exactly. And when you go to scale, you have to do more of it, right?
Yep.
Not less. Then you have to strategize in a bunch of different places. You have to play a bunch of different games. The thing that we can take from that chunk around the king is this, some lessons from this. For leadership to work, people's hearts need to change. And having a non-contentious relationship with your boss is helpful for heart change to happen. Now, sometimes you're going to have a contentious relationship. And by the way, I'm a direct communicator, so that got me in trouble a lot when I was working with bosses, up until my last couple, I don't know, even including my last couple of bosses. And anybody who listens to this podcast used to be a boss or supervisor of mine. You can chime in and you can say, yep, Jesan was a knucklehead, because I knew I was a knucklehead. I didn't like always being told what to do. I didn't like doing things for goals that I didn't understand. I didn't like going in places where I didn't agree with the vision. I didn't like going places where I wasn't totally bought in. And we're going to talk about buy-in from followers in a little bit here. I didn't like any of that. And that caused problems with bosses. I had contentious relationships with bosses because I'm a direct communicator. If I don't like something, I'm going to tell you I don't like that. It didn't work for me. What else do you have? Do you have anything else? And if the only thing the boss has is, well, you're fired, which, by the way, Artaxerxes had a little bit more. Artaxerxes could actually say, well, I'm going to behead you tomorrow. How about that? Like that's
you know, that was going to be one of my points I was going to make, not to cut you off on your train of thought, but is Nehemiah took risks because he knew that the king could have had him killed.
Right.
Good leaders take risks.
They do. And by the way, getting your head cut off back in the day and getting your head cut off now is the same getting your head cut off. Getting your head cut off back in the day is not comparable to, well, I just lost my job. That's not comparable. It may feel that way inside of you, but you can go get another job. You may not want to, you may not enjoy it. There's going to be a lot of sacrifice there, but you can still take the risk if you have a contentious relationship with your boss and go there and you might get beheaded.
When you lose your head, it's hard to get your head back. A job, you can always get a new job.
There you go. That's right. That's exactly correct. For leadership to work, leaders need to be willing to be transparent with those way up the hierarchical ladder about what they want to accomplish. This is the thing that I want to do. And I run into a lot of managers and supervisors who have ideas for what they want to do or get frustrated. And part of the reason why they got frustrated is because they weren't transparent. They were playing a whole bunch of games. They were playing the hiding games or the political games. They were playing the wrong game at the wrong table with the wrong opponents. And this is something that I think leaders have to be, not I think, I know leaders have to be hyper aware of. And this is something that Nehemiah was hyper aware of. They also need to be politically, socially, and organizationally clear about consequences from action and inaction. That's a huge thing. Marcus Aurelius, and we'll talk about this when we read Meditations coming up here in a little bit, is going to talk about consequences. That old boy, he's going to talk about consequences. And he's going to talk about it in real kinds of ways. Because again, the Romans didn't screw around. The Jews were afraid of the Romans. The Babylonians, well, they missed each other by a good chunk, but the Greeks were afraid of the Romans. The Jews were afraid of the Romans. The Egyptians were afraid. Everyone was afraid of the Romans. And the reason why was because the Romans were capable of meting out consequences. And they weren't afraid of where that was going to go. They were proud, martial society built on, to a certain degree, honor. And we'll talk a lot about honor with leadership in our next episode, but that's hugely important for leaders to understand about consequences. And then the last point that you can get from this is, for leadership to work, leaders must be connected to their actual communities. At work, this means knowing your people. It also means knowing your boss without being intimidated into accepting the status quo or being satisfied with the primacy of dysfunction. If I, as a leader, am satisfied with dysfunction, then I'm not going to change anything. I'm not going to take any risks. If the dysfunction, and I know Colby hasn't watched the show because Colby's a man of God. I've watched this show, Game of Thrones. If chaos is a ladder, men of God don't watch this show. So I'm not bound necessarily by that all the time. So I've watched Game of Thrones, and the character in there talks about, a character in there towards the end of the series talks about how chaos is a pit or a ladder. And that's a huge statement. It hit me like a ton of bricks because it's absolutely the truth. Leaders understand that if they are operating in dysfunction, if they are operating in an environment of dysfunction, that's chaos. And they can't let the chaos define where they want to go. And Nehemiah understood this as well.
I just wanted to point out real fast is my biggest takeaway, because we did a lot of back and forth already, so I'm only going to land on one big takeaway from this chapter. My biggest takeaway from it is Nehemiah, when he was talking to the king, if you notice, just like Jesan was saying earlier about buttering him up, if you will. I don't know why I keep using that word. It's a weird word.
They didn't have butter back in it. Well, I mean, they did, but I mean, like, it wasn't,
yeah. Camels. He didn't burn bridges. And I think as leaders and as humans, as people, we need to stop burning bridges and keep connections open as much as possible, because you never know when past relationships and past situations will benefit you or you can benefit them. So my biggest takeaway is, we'll go with two. Nehemiah didn't burn bridges, but also Nehemiah took risks. So we have to take risks, but also try not to burn bridges. There is exceptions to that rule, of course, but I'm generalizing.
Yeah. So I think of, as you say that, I think of organizations that I've worked with as a consultant, as a trainer, primarily over the last 7-8 years. And then I think of my career in higher education of 15 years. Some bridges, I'm going to go with the counterfactual here, the non-obvious, because we've got to talk about that as well. Some bridges need to be set on fire.
Yep.
There are some things that an organization or an individual or a team or even a leader cannot come back from. So the public example that I think of is Wells Fargo. Wells Fargo had some issues inside of its organization with tellers opening up fake accounts. And this was a few years ago, and they solved the problem. And yet there are some bridges that had to be burned in order for that problem to be solved, because there are some things you cannot come back from. This goes directly to expectations And so if leaders are setting correct expectations, and Nehemiah begins to do this process when he goes on his inspection tour, when he starts walking around looking at the walls, like we talked about in the opening. He starts setting expectations with his crew, with his boys, basically, and with his girls. And we'll talk about who built the wall here as well, because that's a good chunk of Nehemiah. Just the list of like who were the people that put their hands to the work. This is kind of amazing. But he set expectations around what you can do and what you can't do. And this goes back to that consequences idea. And then he was willing to be like, hey, you didn't fulfill this expectation. You need to straighten up because there's a clear consequence here. He was also willing to burn bridges with enemies. And I'm going to talk about the rules of enemies here. There's 7 rules of enemies. We're kind of turning the corner a little bit here on this podcast episode here in the middle. There are 7 rules of dealing with enemies that Nehemiah talks about. And I don't know if anybody who's ever read Nehemiah, and you've read Nehemiah obviously extensively, and you've studied it, like you said in the opening. I don't know if anybody's ever framed it that way, but there's 7 things that you need to do in order to deal with enemies that Nehemiah does. And Sanballat and Tobias, those guys are going to come by, and those little boys are going to come by, and you have to deal with them. And you cannot be friends with them because they are not seeking to be friends with you. They're seeking to destroy you. And so those are bridges that you have to burn sometimes, but you got to be clear on what you're doing. And it's really hard, by the way, when your enemies are followers, when the enemies are embedded in you, in your team, or they're embedded in the camp of people who should be on your side and yet aren't.
Yep. The book of Nehemiah, what's good about it is his enemies are quite clear. You know what I mean? Tobias, I like to call him Tobias because of Arrested Development. He does that corny line, which we'll get to, but even if a fox jumps up on the wall, we'll knock over, and I can picture him doing a fake high five to his friends. Like, that was an awesome, yeah, like, whoa, I got him good on that one. So in that case, his enemies are very clear. It is very hard to tell who your enemies are inside an organization. I'm just confirmed. I don't even have a solution to your point. Is this a confirmation that it's hard to tell when your enemies aren't in plain sight?
I think I think in the example of usury in Nehemiah 5, I think that example gives you some idea of how to deal with your followers when they are not behaving appropriately, when they're wandering towards not just violating expectations because they've already done that. Now they're wandering into a space of, oh boy, we're going to have to remove you. You've now become an enemy.
And then it's perfectly good to burn bridges. I was making my point because Nehemiah and the king, he didn't burn his bridges. So just so Jesan knows, I was only making my point off that chapter. I wasn't skipping ahead like you were.
It's my podcast. I can skip ahead if I want. I can skip ahead all day. Great. And by the way, we're recording this, so I get to move things around too. It's the awesomeness of
you can cut that out later so no one knows I just said that.
Whole thing that you just said. You know what? The Colby Sutter sections, we're just going to cut that out. Oh my gosh. Back to Nehemiah. So 2:12-20. So I don't want to actually read from that, because you can go through and read that. That's a huge chunk there. I don't want to actually read from that. That takes a lot of our time. Instead, I want to mention some following points, and I want to direct you to some verses that will maybe help you. So when Nehemiah goes on the inspection tour, when he goes and looks at the broke down walls, he comes to a couple of different conclusions. And these are some things that for leaders can be very helpful. So Nehemiah scouted the land before committing fully to action. He understood the game he was playing, as we've said before. He understood the land he was on, right? He understood how things were going to really be working. Sure, he had support. He had his heart aligned, but the people need to see the land, and he needed to see the land before he could lead the people. You need to see the thing that you're putting yourself up against as a leader. Get out of your office. Get out from behind the email. Stop hiding in your office if you're a leader. Stop hiding behind email. Stop hiding behind your to-do list. Stop hiding behind your calendar. Get out and go into the field and talk to the people. Does that mean that the quote unquote real work you have to do, the work that you, maybe your boss, your King Artaxerxes is yelling at you about in the hierarchy, may have to get put on the back burner for a while? Yeah, but that boss should understand that what I actually hired this person to do, male or female, what I actually hired this person to do is to engage with people, because that's the act of leadership. That's what I'm paying them to do. I'm paying them to lead. Though he was scouting with a small group to whom only he could confide, he was able to solidify a plan of action to rebuild the wall of Jerusalem. So this is the other thing you see when he's scouting the wall. And you see this in verses 17 and 18 of chapter 2. Aim small, miss small at the beginning of a project. Scouting matters. Like I was using the example of selling to a coffee roaster. That's a poor example. Let me use a poor example on my part. Selling training to a company that has a robust internal training process. And they say, hey, you know what? We don't need you. Go away. And I say, okay, thanks. Goodbye. And that's the end of that scouting, right? Because the no is the thing that tells me I didn't plan enough. I didn't aim appropriately. I wasn't aligned at the beginning of the project. I aimed too large.
Yeah. I'm going to chime in real fast just because I love, it's one of my favorite analogies. I love this verse because when I do, as you said before, I'm a reverend, so I do ministry. I tell people all the time this, but it applies to anyone in anything, is a lot of times when we get a dream inside us, so I'm not specifically talking about a goal, but I'm talking about when we get a dream or aspiration as an entrepreneur or as a leader or just as an individual that we want to accomplish. At first, the less people you tell, the better. It's better to meditate on it, think about it, tell a small group of people, and let it grow from there. Because when you aim too big right off the gate, as you just said, aim small, miss small, everyone is there to spectate and watch you. Just like in Nehemiah, he went small because he knew if he aimed huge and told everyone and then it failed, there's bigger consequences that way. You can't grow a dream as good when you aim big. You need to start small inside your dream and start working the steps. I love that part of the verse there, just because I love the concept of meditating and letting a dream or a passion or a goal or a desire to grow inside you small. And then you can grow it as big as you want.
Right. Let it metastasize, right? You know, I think of it the way I think of mushrooms, right? Except maybe not like mushrooms, right? You know, you don't want to feed it crap. You want to feed it healthy things, but you also want to let it grow in the dark a little bit. You know, you want to let it metastasize. You want to let it grow. You want to let it expand. That was a lesson that, quite frankly, I had to learn the hard way. And I used the insight, the wisdom from that lesson to push myself to do bigger things on projects. So, for instance, this podcast. This is the first episode of a podcast that will become part of a much larger project called the Leadership Salon Project. And we're launching that project in September with this podcast. Every time I've talked about a project, I am now backed into a corner and have to do it. Because to Colby's point, there are now people looking at me. Even if I fail and it sucks, there's still people looking at me. And the thing that I've learned is there's always spectators. That's just, you can't help it. That's the nature of the game, right? So sometimes your spectators are your wife. Sometimes your spectators are your kids if you're in a family situation, or your husband, you know, and your kids. Sometimes spectators are your neighbors. And we live in a world of social media. So the second you put something on Facebook, the second you put something on Instagram, the second you put a post on LinkedIn, like I put a post on LinkedIn explaining, and you can go look at my LinkedIn and connect with me there if you're interested, but explaining why I was doing this project. Now I've got 7,000 or so connections on LinkedIn. I'm not bragging. I'm just telling you that that's the number of spectators now that have now joined the arena that are going, okay, what's Jesan going to do? Is he actually going to commit to this? For some people, that's a lot of pressure. They can't even handle 10 people on their team looking at them, much less 7,000 anonymous people, only 10% of whom, actually under 10% of whom may ever comment or actually engage. A lot of people in the stands looking.
I think it's really important. This is what I do in my own self for leadership and dreams and entrepreneur and everything else, is having a set team of 3 to 4 people that you dream with and you plan with and you brainstorm with. I have a same group of people that I always go to when I have a big idea. And I And they know that I'm just using them to bounce ideas off and meditate on and see if it's an idea worth pursuing or not. Because I've also worked for leaders who had big ideas every other day, but nothing ever got done. So therefore you stop kind of listening and paying attention because their big ideas every day end up failing because there's no follow through or commitment.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And I think leaders have to be very clear about, this is a big idea for right now. This is a big idea for tomorrow. And this is a big idea for way down the road. Like not even tomorrow, but like literally like way down the road, 10 years tomorrow. Leaders have to plan a vision, because without a vision, like from Psalms, the people perish, right? Great, cool. Lay out the vision for me. And here's the other piece of it. If you want to lay out a big idea for me, great. And then you have to repeat it over and over again until it becomes a small idea, until it reduces itself in size, right? Back to Nehemiah 2, just a couple of more points. Through scouting and confirming what he was going to see, Nehemiah was able to confirm his vision of what he wanted the work to be. He got an idea of where the hard parts might be, and he was able to figure out who his enemies might be. And this is where Sanballat and Tobiah start to like really pop up, right? These ideas of who are my enemies? What does the ground look like? Scouting means something, right? What am I doing? Where am I going? Who is going along with me? Who's going to oppose me? What are the pitfalls? What are the potholes? What is the pinnacle and what is the promise? Where are we going? What's the vision? Without a vision, the people perish. Heck, without a vision, leaders can't lead. I love, well, I don't love, but I like a lot the Cheshire Cat in Alice in Wonderland. And the first time the Cheshire Cat meets Alice, or Alice meets the Cheshire Cat, depending upon how you're looking at this, you know,
you're about to quote one of my favorite quotes ever, Lewis Carroll, one of my favorite authors of all time. I already know what quote you're going to use.
You already know what quote I'm going to use. That's right. She asks him, where do I want to, where do we go? And he goes, well, that depends, or which path do I take? And he says, I'm paraphrasing now, so I'm probably going to screw it up, but which path do I take? And he says, well, that just depends upon which way you want to go. And she says, well, I don't know. And he says, well, then it doesn't really matter which way you pick.
Yep.
If you don't know where you're going, it doesn't matter which way you're going. If you don't have an end goal, right? Zig Ziglar, the great speaker and trainer and sales developer, who basically Ziglar International owns the South, right? South and the West. Zig Ziglar, the grandfather to folks like Tony Robbins and Brian Tracy and all of these kinds of guys, the great-grandfather to all of the Instagram influencers who are running around doing motivational stuff that you're seeing now, and the great-great-granddaddy to folks like me and Colby and other folks, right? The guy who made it possible in America for us to stand up and basically talk about leadership and motivation. Zig Ziglar said, if you get on a plane and you're flying from New York City to Denver, although he wouldn't use New York City, he would talk about Dallas because that's where he was from. But if you were flying from New York City to Denver or New York City to Dallas, and turbulence started happening between New York City and Dallas, you don't want the pilot coming on the mic saying, hey, you know what, folks, we've hit a little turbulence. We're going to turn around and go back to New York City. You'd be irritated. You'd be upset. You'd be like knocking on that door trying to get that old boy out the cabin. That's what you would say. You're going to Dallas one way or another. You're going to navigate the turbulence. You're going to navigate the winds. Heck, you may even have to land the plane and go rent a bus or train or a car, but you're getting to Dallas. Now, the example I always use is Denver, because you got to fly over the Rocky Mountains a little bit to get to Denver, but you're going to Denver. Once a leader has a goal in mind, once a leader has an idea, a vision, then the leader can plot for resistance, because there will be turbulence. There will be the Sanballats. There will be the Tobias. There will be the opposition. And by the way, to paraphrase from, not to paraphrase, but to quote directly from Jocko Willink, the enemy gets a vote. We may not like it, no matter how we feel about it, but the enemy gets a vote. Circumstances get a vote. And so we have to be aware of that. Last piece of thought from Nehemiah 2, 12 through 20. And this is based off of verse 20. Nehemiah was transparent and firm with his small group. and he was transparent and firm with his potential enemies. You're not going to move me off of my rock because I've decided this is the thing I'm going to do. Now, we could talk about stubbornness, which I'm sure Colby has some ideas about that. I have some ideas about stubbornness. Does stubbornness help or hurt leaders?
That's a great question. I'm going to let you answer that, Jesan.
I defer to the right representative from Hustle. I defer to him. I'm deferring my time.
What I love about that too is, and then I'll let you chime in on that too, is stubbornness sometimes is great, obviously, when you're trying to accomplish something, but the other thing that's negative about stubbornness is you don't listen to other people's opinions, and you don't know when to change your course of action. So I'm a boxer. I boxed for 10 years. And whenever I teach anything or talk to people, once again, because I like to use stories and illustrations and examples, this is how I teach and communicate. For you who can't see Jesan's boxing right now in the camera, this is one of my principles I actually wrote about in a book that I am editing now before it's published, called Charge the Storms. And one of the principles in it is a principle of boxing. When you plan something out, you set your goal, and this transpires into stubbornness. You set your goal. What you need to do is, just like a boxer, each round you go back to your corner and you reevaluate what's working and what's not working. When you're in a boxing match, if you're not winning, your cornerman, your coach will tell you, you're doing this wrong, you're leaving your guard down, you're not doing the combinations. So each round you reevaluate, but your goal is still the same. Your goal is to win the boxing match. So if I am stubborn and I'm a leader, I don't listen to my cornerman. I don't listen to my even self when I'm reevaluating, because I'm going to keep my same strategy because I'm stuck in my ways. And usually it doesn't end up winning that way. So you need to be able to reevaluate yourself. And I'm sure Jesan's going to contradict and talk about why stubbornness is good. Maybe not, but that's why I believe stubbornness is bad.
I think stubbornness has
its place, if you will.
It has its place. I think that leaders, much like entrepreneurs, have to be bullheaded and stubborn. It's kind of like artists, right? So I went to art school for many years. My bachelor's degree is in the fine arts. Most people don't know that about me. They don't associate me with art in any kind of way, and that's okay. That's fine. I didn't go to school for them. I went to school for me, so that's all right. And I was in printmaking, and I was in painting. And one of the fundamental things about art is ego. And we were just talking about how ego can be a bad thing. And this is the dichotomy of leadership, right? You have to appeal to egos, but you have to also check your own ego. This is the dichotomy of leadership. And you have to know when to do that, right? You have to know how to do that, and you have to know why to do that. Okay, cool. Same thing with stubbornness. I also did martial arts for many years. So Colby did Colby box, right? I did martial arts, various types of striking arts. I'm a striker. I'm tall. I'm skinny. For those of you who can't see me, I'm tall. I'm thin. I'm a relatively light guy. I'm fairly quick. I do not want to go to ground with you. I'm not going to do jiu-jitsu with you. Pache, Jocko, I'm not going to go to ground with you.
I was just going to add, for the people who can't see me, I look just like Brad Pitt.
Yes, we are. He does look like Brad Pitt. It's shocking how close. I mean, Gwyneth Paltrow would be confused. Identical. Gwyneth Paltrow would be confused if she were here right now in the studio. When I did martial arts, I learned that if you want to tag a guy, it's not as if they're just going to like stand there because you're not playing patty cake. You got to get in and get after it. And I played rugby for a number of years as well. And so, my coach, and he talks about coaches, my coach told me you have to want the ball more than you want your body. You have to want the ball more than you want life itself. You have to want it more. Well, that means that my will, and we don't actually talk about will too much as leaders, but my will has to be so overwhelmingly powerful to drive forward even a positive thing. Let's talk about it in a positive way. To drive forward even a positive thing, a positive vision, a positive goal, that it can overcome any obstacle placed in front of it. Now that comes off to, we talked about spectators. That comes off to spectators as bullheaded stubbornness, particularly if spectators aren't on your side. I'm not talking about I'm not talking about they're your enemies. That's a different thing. But spectators who are watching and who are just like, oh, I would never do that. That looks really hard. Like, how many people have walked up to you, Colby, in the time that you've been not only leading, but also working, entrepreneurship? Oh, wow, that looks really hard. I would never do that. Actually, they don't ever say that. Here's what they say. Wow, Colby, you're so lucky. You're so lucky you get to work from home.
Yep. At least 50 times a day.
Right.
or they think what we do is easy because they don't see the hours and hours and weeks that go behind writing and planning and strategizing and coming up with content and material. They just think we show up and it's game time.
Exactly.
So all the time.
Oh, you're so lucky. Oh, you're so lucky. And, I have a whole series of videos around this because it isn't luck. It's 10 years of work. It's 10,000 hours of going in and getting your face bashed in multiple times, going back to the corner, as Colby was saying, getting up and jumping back in there. And by the way, it's also self-doubt, wondering if you're in the right game, wondering if you're in the right fight, wondering how long the fight's going to go on, wondering how long you can last. And by the way, you can't always talk about these things as a leader, as an entrepreneur, as an individual building a world-changing product. This is the kind of stuff that's inside of folks like Steve Jobs that we laud, and he just used his ego to overwhelm it, or even Bill Gates or Elon Musk, any of those names that we could name, and we can name them all. And it's been a while. We've been we're now an hour and 45 minutes into this conversation, or an hour and a half into this conversation, and I haven't mentioned them. Like, that's been a while, right? Because they just get mentioned all the time. We don't need to give them more airplay. And the thing inside of them, yes, is their brilliance, yes, is their ego, but it's also that will to get up and get hit in the face again.
Yep.
Most people who have a mindset of I will follow, we're going to talk about followership on this podcast as well, but a mindset of following, it does not lend itself to stubbornness.
It's good. Well, I just wanted to chime in 100% what you just said, even about the self-doubt. I just want to let people know, leaders out there and everyone else, if you don't question or think about giving up or quitting at least 50 times a week, something's wrong with you. I think all good leaders, all good entrepreneurs, all good anyone, it's our biggest enemy is ourself, our biggest Tobias. I keep calling him Tobias because the rest of development, I'll never call him by his proper name.
That's all right.
Our biggest enemies is ourself a lot of times, our self-doubt and our self-fight in our head that we're in the wrong game, we're doing the wrong thing, or we're not good enough, we're not smart enough. The people that succeed, the true leaders and the true successful people, doesn't depend on your wealth or your status. As I believe it's the people who fight through that self-doubt and keep continuing on to the mission.
And I would be bereft if I didn't mention this, entrepreneurs or leaders, let's talk about leaders specifically, leaders who are from minority groups, leaders who are women. Irish, sure. Yeah.
I was kidding.
No, you're right. No. Actually, you're right. In America, for a while, the Irish need not apply. No, absolutely correct. Like, you're just talking about your grandma. Your grandma remembers that. Irish need not apply, right?
Yep.
The part of upstate New York where this studio is currently located was dominated by Italians. Italians didn't become quote unquote white, whatever that may mean. And we'll talk about that much later. Don't send me emails about it. I did say quote unquote, don't send me emails about it. I don't want to hear from you about that. But, those kinds of individuals, not yet anyway, we'll have a specific podcast for that, and then you can all yell at me about that. But those individuals, they didn't become that thing for quite some time. And you still got people walking around who don't believe that they're that thing, okay? So when you talk about minorities, when you talk about women, when you talk about individuals who have a mindset of I am the other, and then feel as though, or may in reality be othered by other people, well, that's an extra layer on top of this. And so the thing that I have to sometimes coach minority leaders through, or female leaders through, is this idea of imposter syndrome, this idea that I'm not really worthy enough to be here. And the thing that you sometimes have to recognize is, and not sometimes, you do recognize is, everybody has a touch of imposter syndrome if they're playing the game right.
Yep.
The people who don't have a touch of imposter syndrome tend to be overwhelmed by arrogancy or ego or overwhelming stubbornness, and tend to be, quite frankly, piss poor leaders. I was reading a story about Lime, the scooter company. And it's basically Uber for scooters, basically, is what Lime was, if I'm remembering correctly. And their leadership, not even their leadership, the leader of Lime, the CEO, the way his behavior was described in the expose that I was reading on The Verge, you can go Google it if you want to see it. The way his behavior was described was absolutely atrocious. Arrogancy, ego, absolutely atrocious. Not a trace of humility. I think humility is on the other side of imposter syndrome. It's the positive end of imposter syndrome. The negative end is I'm just an imposter and I'm going to take myself out of the game. The positive end is, yes, I'm an imposter and I'm humble about it and I'm still going to keep going. He wasn't even anywhere near that, right? The way his behavior was described. And again, things are blown up for the media. I get that. And again, now you can send me emails about that. I get that. Like, things are blown up for the media and all that. But my point is, the people who don't have that ability to engage in self-doubt, they don't have that ability to self-question. Yeah, they may succeed materially, but they're going to lose in the long run. You can't gain the world and lose your soul.
I think a great point to that too is, I'll leave it at this last point for this particular part, is you already mentioned it, and I just want to capitalize on it because it all fits together, is the transparency. Being transparent is a lost art in our society today because we're afraid to show any sort of weakness or any questioning. So I think the more transparent you are as a boss or as an individual, the more dedicated your followers will be, your people you're leading will be, even the people you're doing life with, your relationships. Transparency, for me, breeds connection and ownership and just liability with each other. I love your point on transparency. I could talk for hours on being transparent, just because I think it's a lost art in our society today. We want to puff up our chests and pretend we've made it and we have no weaknesses and nothing bothers us.
And transparency fundamentally is mixed up with authenticity. We're going to get into that when we talk about Spinoza and ethics. I may invite you back on for that. We may have a 3-person roundtable around Spinoza and ethics, because there are ethical considerations around transparency and authenticity for leaders. Yep. Because open book management is really rife it's really rife with problems. Yep. But also so is leading in a flat organization, right? What kind of project do I want to build, and what kind of thing do I want to develop, and what kind of team do I want to lead? Now, if the team is given to you, that's a different little thing there. You can do some quirking and some changing and some things like this. But if you have an opportunity to build a team, you really have to think about transparency. You really have to think about authenticity. You really have to think about how much do I want to have these people brought in. And I'm not expecting off the top of my head. When you work in higher education and doing the kind of work that I used to do, you have a new crop of students every 9 months, which means every 9 months, you got to rethink all of this stuff if you're actually engaged with leading people in the way that you need to be leading them.
There'll be a great topic, just because if you think about it, even in ministry, so being a reverend and being a minister, you can't be completely transparent. Right. So let's say, I'm going to use this as an example, but it's not a true one. But obviously, let's say I'm struggling with my faith, or I don't believe at this particular point in my journey. Maybe, we have this issue. If you're transparent to the people you're leading and say, no, I don't know if I believe in God right now. I need to work through this. You're going to lose followers. People are going to be like, why am I following this guy?
You're going to bleed followers like a nuclear weapon bleeds radioactive waste. Like,
you need to know when to be transparent and when not to. So that'll be an interesting subject, an interesting podcast.
Well, and also the depth of transparency.
Yeah.
Like, how deep do you want to, and again, where are leaders being intentional about this, and where are they just being accidental?
Yep.
I keep going back to intentionality over and over and over again. No more accidents for leaders. That's one of the points of this, not only this podcast, but also this series. That's the point of reading these books. How do we avoid being accidental? Not even avoid it. How do we not start on that path in the beginning? How do we start from a position of sitting in a room? You've been given this thing called a team. You've been given this responsibility or this position in an organization, and now you've got to do something with it. What is that something going to be? Back to the book. I want to talk a little bit about kind of turning the corner a little bit. And there's a lot in this book. We're only on chapter 3 right now. And so I want to turn the corner here, and I want to talk a little bit about who the followers were of Nehemiah. Who are the people who built the wall? Nehemiah 3, verse 5. And next unto them the Tekoites repaired, but their nobles put not their necks to the work of their Lord. Now, the reason why I'm pulling that out is because there's a list beforehand in Nehemiah 3, 1 through 4, of the people who were putting their necks to the work. And what jumped out at me about that was the people who thought they were better than the people who were doing the work. Yeah, they were going to kind of tacitly support Nehemiah. They were going to kind of tacitly put their hands to work, but they weren't going to be all in. Their hearts weren't in it. And it's no accident that the language of nobles and necks is used in here. Their nobles put not their necks to the work of their Lord. Not the work of Nehemiah, by the way, the work of the larger vision, the work of the Lord. Nehemiah consistently brings it back to this idea that this is bigger than us, this is bigger than us, this is bigger than us. If he were at Apple and he were Steve Jobs, he would be saying, we are here to change the world, we are here to change the world, we are here to change the world. If he were at Facebook and he were Mark Zuckerberg, we are here to change the world, we are here to change the world, we are here to change the world. Constantly bring back to this larger idea. In our secular 21st century time, we forget that transcendental relationship with being mattered a lot before the Enlightenment, before the explosion that happened where we abandoned God. Yes, I use the G word. We abandoned God and put him in a corner. And it took us, a good 400 or 500 years to do that, but abandoned God, put him in the corner. And now we can begin, just like in the Tower of Babel, we can begin to do all of those things that we can put our hands to. We can begin to build the tower to the height of the universe. And yet we still have problems that are very human because they come from the transcendent side of ourselves. And that transcendent side of ourselves shows up when people refuse to put their necks to the work, not for the leader, but for the larger purpose. We see that transcendent side show up, and we would be bereft if we did not recognize it as leaders. Too often leaders don't talk about spirituality because it's a touchy subject. It might get to religion. We can't talk about that at work. Okay, let's talk about meaning. Fine, don't talk about spirituality. Fine, let's talk about meaning. Why are people on your team showing up to do the work that they're doing? Colby already mentioned this with knowing your team's why. I want to double down on this. It's not just knowing your team's why, it's knowing where the why stops. And for these nobles, their why stopped at a certain point. Now, it's never very clear in Nehemiah why their why stopped, although later on you get the suspicion that the nobles were also the ones that were engaged in usury and slavery. So they were double-minded individuals, and they weren't quite as focused on Nehemiah as they could have been because they were playing multiple games on multiple tables versus just playing one poker game on one table. But you get the sense at this point in Nehemiah, when the people are really starting to come out, the work is starting to be done. People have a sword in one hand and a shovel in the other, that they're getting after it. And these nobles, the nobles aren't quite on board. Leaders can see this in organizations and on teams when they start doing work, and then their parallel colleagues who they have to influence and have no authority over just aren't on board. I see this in organizations and in businesses that I go into that are fairly large, and I'm talking about 1,000 to 2,000 employees and up. When you get into that level, now you're getting into some scale issues because now you have divisions and you have departments. And you'll sit in a room with 25 managers or 25 supervisors, all of whom should be positional leaders, and they would call themselves positional leaders. That's fine. And you'll watch them all not be on board with each other. And they won't say it out loud, but you'll watch maybe one go, hey, I really believe in the mission, vision, goals. But you'll have this other person going, well, that didn't work for me last time, or I have all this history, or what's in it for me, the WIFM, WIIFM, what's in it for me, thought process. And you'll see it happen non-verbally. It never happens verbally. And you'll tell folks, and I've told folks this before, you all have to be aligned in this room. Because if you're not aligned in this room, then when you go out to put the neck to the work of the organization, you're not going to do it. The guy over there will, but you're not going to do it to the same fervent level that guy over there will with his team. And by the way, you might also then wander into the space of allowing that guy and his team to do all the work, or that woman and her team to do all the work, and take credit for that work and then use that work to politically leverage yourself up the hierarchy. Meanwhile, that person doesn't get the benefit, and that team doesn't get the acknowledgement. This jumped out at me because this is something that is huge. Not every follower of yours is going to be on board. Not every follower is going to whistle while they work. Keep going back to that over and over again. They're not going to be happy, right? They're going to want to play their own game. And so as a leader, you have to be aware of this. Nehemiah, I think, was aware of this. The list of people that Nehemiah worked with, and I'll kind of close this out. The list of people that Nehemiah worked with, they were sons of apothecaries. That's a fancy word for a pharmacist. They were sons of goldsmiths. They were sons of merchants, right? They were priests. Some of them were nobles. Some of the nobles were on board, though not all of them. Farmers. And even, and this is pointed out in Nehemiah very specifically, even the daughters of rulers. So we talk about the Bible sometimes, and we don't like to look at it because we're like, oh, it's discriminatory. Oh, it's against women. It's against minorities. It's against, it's all these prohibitions against what you can do, what you can't do. It's against fun. We're going to throw it out. And by the way, it's about this God guy, and we don't believe in him anyway. Nietzsche said we killed him, and so we're done. Okay, cool. But Nietzsche also said, by the way, on the back end of that quote, which everybody forgets, that there isn't enough blood, or there's enough water to wash the blood off your hands after you kill God. He was correct, by the way. The entire history of the 20th century, and increasingly the history of the 21st century, is showing this, is demonstrating this loudly for all with ears to hear and eyes to see. When you're talking about the sons and daughters of rulers, you can see even in the Old Testament, there is an idea that in order to be a follower, your gender, your orientation, your race, none of this matters. What matters is, can you put your hands to the work of the vision? Can you put your hands to accomplishing the work of the vision? That's what's hugely important in chapter 3 here. Thoughts, Colby?
I think agree 100%, and it comes down to once again, self-reflection, self-realization that if you're on the wrong team, if you're a worker, you need to know you're on the wrong team and be able to have confidence to find something else and maybe leave an employment instead of going against the grain. But also as a manager or a boss, a person in authority who's in charge of hiring someone, it's very important that you get the right people on the bus, as the old saying goes. You might not even know what position to put someone in, but if you know they belong on your bus, you hire them onto your team and work a position in for them. I had a great leader once tell me that is he built his entire organization up by just putting the right people on the bus. If he knew you belonged on his bus, his vision, his future, he put you on the team. He hired you because he knew that character, whatever you had in you, was what he needed to succeed. I think one of your points you made too was, do people work harder when they have something to lose? That's a good one. That's a tough one. Something that I think takes great wrestling, if you will, like I said in the beginning, back and forth in your head, because I go two ways on this. We all work harder when we have something to lose, obviously. It depends what it is we have to lose. But I once talked to a great woman that I look up to. She's a mentor of mine, and she was telling me about some health issues she had. And when she started telling me about it, she's like, I need to start getting in shape because I have something to lose. The problem with that is, this is what she told me, and like I said, I'm a storyteller, so I tell stories. She said, as soon as I met with her later on, as soon as I started feeling better and things got better, I stopped working out. So that's a problem with working for something to lose, is a lot of times it's temporary or it's fast, because that thing that we have to lose either changes or we lose that motivation. That's why I think it's important to find the why once again. As soon as you start working for a why, I believe we work harder, we work in the right direction.
Yeah, character counts in all kinds of ways, and we either move towards we move away from a loss or we move towards a gain. You know, that's just the standard. There's a lot in Nehemiah, a lot to look at. I want to talk about enemies though, because I think this is hugely important for people to understand. And so there are various rules we can learn about how Nehemiah handled his enemies. And I'm going to skip around a little bit as we talk about these enemies, as we talk about these rules. There's 7, maybe 8 of them. Well, honestly, there's probably 8, but I tried to whittle it down to 7. There's 7 rules that I think individuals have to really focus on when they are thinking about leading and dealing with their enemies. So Nehemiah 2, 9 and 10, again from the King James Bible. Then I came to the governors beyond the river and gave them the king's letters. Now the king had sent captains of the army and horsemen with me. So this was Artaxerxes sending him out right at the beginning. When Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the servant, the Ammonite, heard of it, it grieved them exceedingly that there was come a man to seek the welfare of the children of Israel. So these 2 old boys are going to be a problem for Nehemiah. And that's the first rule of enemies. If you are leading, expect resistance. Plan for it to happen. Be aware of the environments that cause resistance, and then face the challenge. Too many leaders I see, I don't say they engage in happy talk, that's terrible, but they kind of pretend like resistance is not going to happen, like everybody's just going to suddenly be bought in, and that's not true. And Nehemiah shows this. You're going to have Sanballat the Horonite, and you're going to have Tobiah the Ammonite showing up, except they won't be called Sanballat and Tobiah. They'll be called, Bob and Jim, right, from accounting.
Yes.
They're going to show up. It's Tobias from Arrested Development. And he's going to show up, he's going to be colored blue, and it's going to be a whole thing. It's going to be a whole thing. Or he's going to have this weird, thing growing out of his head. If you watch the show Arrested Development, you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't, go away and watch it, and then come back. Pause this podcast, go watch Arrested Development, all of it, and then come back. But you're going to have those kinds of folks come along. They're going to challenge you, and that's the first rule: expect resistance. Rule number 2, Nehemiah 2, 19 and 20. When Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the servant, the Ammonite, and Geshem the Arabian heard it, they laughed us to scorn and despised us and said, "What is this thing that you do? Will you rebel against the king?" Then I answered them and I said unto them, "The God of heaven, he will prosper us. Therefore we, his servants, will arise and build. But you have no portion, nor right, nor memorial in Jerusalem." When you start something that you think you can't do, your enemies will reveal themselves through mocking you. Sometimes your friends will mock you too. We've already talked about that. But you've got to make sure that you're aligned with a higher authority. You've got to make sure that you're aligned with a higher authority as a leader. That can be an ethic, as we've already talked about. It could be a transcendent deity, God, in particular, Jesus, or even the organization itself. But get aligned or the mockery will undermine you. It'll just undermine you. And Colby and I have talked about this. It'll undermine you. It'll drop kick you right out of it, because it'll breed that imposter syndrome, which we've already covered. Nehemiah 4, 1 through 3. Actually, no. Nehemiah 6, actually. Let's go to Nehemiah 6, because that's really where rule number 3 is. Nehemiah 6, because they're negotiating with him, right? And now he's built the wall. He's starting to build the wall. He's starting to put things in place. The people they've got their shovel in one hand and they've got their sword in the other. He's gotten the nobles straightened out. He's fixed the usury problem, which you can read about in chapter 5. And now the enemies show back up again. Nehemiah 6, 1 through 4. Now it came to pass when Sanballat the Tobiah and Tobiah and Geshem the Arabian and the rest of our enemies heard that I had builded the wall, and that there was no breach left therein. Though at that time I had not set up the doors on the gate. So I haven't quite finished it yet, but I've got it enough where nobody's going to break in. That Sanballat and Geshem sent unto me, saying, "Come, let us meet together in one of the villages on the plain of Ono." But they thought to do me mischief. And I said to them, saying, "I am doing a great work, so that I cannot come down. I'm busy, leave me alone. Why should the work cease whilst I leave it and come down to you?" Yet they sent unto me 4 times after this sort, and I answered them after the same manner. So they bugged him 4 times. And the reason why they bugged him 4 times, and my master's degree is in conflict resolution and reconciliation. I'm trained in negotiation, conflict management, and negotiation. The reason that they bugged him 4 times was because they were seeking to negotiate with him. This was their opening bid. This was their, hey, this is how we're going to go. This is how we're going to go at it, right? So we mocked you. We laughed at you. We sent people against you. We even tried to usurp your temple. And we even tried to get my boy in there, which we'll talk about in a minute, to ruin the temple and ruin the sacrifices, ruin your internal dynamics. We tried all that. And now we're going to negotiate with you. Enemies will seek to negotiate with you, but it's designed to probe your weaknesses as a leader. It's not a genuine negotiation. So this is for anybody. I don't care what background you come from. Negotiate with outrageous confidence. Don't bluff, but don't back down either. That's rule number 3 in dealing with enemies. Don't bluff, but don't back down either. Understand that when you are confronted by a bully, the solution is not always, and you could maybe even say never, but not always to bully back the bully. Then you get into a power dynamic, right? You get into a battle of fixed wills. And maybe you don't want to be in that battle. Maybe you don't have enough will to get into a battle of fixed positions in order to be successful. Maybe what you need to do is be more clever and be consistent. And this is the thing that Nehemiah was. He was consistent. I said the same thing to them 4 times. I didn't back away from it. Back to the book, Nehemiah 6, 5-9. Then sent Sanballat his servant unto me in manner the 5th time with an open letter in his hand. So now he's coming back to him a 5th time. These guys aren't giving up. Wherein it was written, it is reported among the heathen, and Gashmu saith it, that thou and the Jews think to rebel. He's going back to this rebellion idea. You were seeking to be disobedient. I'm going to use that to scare you. For which cause thou buildest the wall, that thou mayest be their king, according to these words. And thou hast also appointed prophets to preach of Jerusalem, to preach of thee at Jerusalem, saying, there is a king in Judah. How dare you say there was a king, by the way. There's a king in Judah, and now it shall be reported to the king according to these words. Come now, therefore, and let us take counsel together. Come. Kind of like in the Lion King, right? Star. Come in. Let's break bread together. Come into my cave. It'll be all right. Then I sent unto him, saying, there are no such things done as thou sayest. You don't know what you're talking about. But thou feignest them out of their own heart. These are things coming out of your own will. These things coming out of your own mind. They don't match reality. This is another way that you deal with enemies, by the way. You challenge their view of reality. For they all made us afraid, saying, their hand shall be weakened from the work, that it be not done. And then he doesn't go to Artaxerxes. He doesn't go to the people. Nehemiah goes back to the vision. He goes back to the transcendent deity. He goes back to the thing that he is on. Now, therefore, O God, strengthen my hands. Dance with your fear. Sanballat is the kind of guy who will stab or who will threaten to stab even his own followers at the negotiation table. If he's trying to suck you into the cave, don't go in. It's dangerous. Are you going to be afraid? Yes, absolutely. You would be crazy if you weren't. Matter of fact, I'd be worried about you if you weren't afraid. You should be afraid, but don't let that fear paralyze you. Dance as a leader with your fear. Dance with your fears. That's rule number 4.
I love it. I will continue, but I just love the dance with your fears. I think so many of us as leaders and just as people, once again, we don't like to confront our fears. We don't like to dance with them. It's almost like you just said about being clever and outsmarting your bully. That's how you dance with your fears when you're being confronted by a Sanballat. We all have those.
A mocker, right?
Yeah, we all have those in our organizations. We all have those people in our life. We all have people like that around. So I just wanted to capitalize it. That was a great point. I like that, dance with your fears.
You have to, right? Because if you don't, your fears will waltz you around the room.
Yep.
So it's better for you to waltz with them than them waltzing with you.
And they'll point you in a different direction when they're done waltzing you around.
There you go. That's right. Sometimes you might wind up in that sewer that, like, down with like the PhD. You might wind up down in there. You don't want to be down in there.
Nope. Let
Dr.
Williams be down there by himself.
Yeah, well, there you go. That's right. We're gonna have to get Dr. Williams on here. He's gonna be like, "What are you people talking about?" We got to share this episode with him. Back to Nehemiah. Nehemiah 6, 10-13. Afterward, I came unto the house of Shemaiah, the son of Delaiah, the son of Mehetabel. I love the names, who was shut up. And he said, let us meet together in the house of God within the temple, and let us shut the doors of the temple, for they will come to slay you. Yea, in the night they will come to slay you. So Nehemiah is being lured into the temple, and this is something very interesting and specific to Jewish theology, Jewish history, and Jewish custom. Non-Levite individuals were not supposed to go into the temple. There's a whole bunch of reasons why, which we can't get into. But basically, as a leader, there are places you probably shouldn't go. You should be aware of what those places are, right? That's the larger issue. You should be sucked in, because that's an opportunity for you to stumble, an opportunity for you to fall. And Nehemiah says to him, should such a man as I flee? How dare you get me to run away? Not only run away, but run away into the cave, going back to this cave idea. And who is there that, being as I am, would go into the temple to save his life? I will not go in. I won't violate that standard. I won't violate that boundary. Remember at the beginning we were talking about walls? I won't jump over that wall. There's a boundary beyond which I will not go. And lo, I perceived that God had not sent him, but that he pronounced his prophecy against me. For Tobiah and Sanballat had hired him. Look at that. Don't break your own rules to play the game by their rules as a leader, or you'll lose the game. That's rule number 5. Last 2 rules.
I love your points. I'm just going to continue. I'm writing them down because that's a great point too. Don't break your rules to play the game by their rules, because you lose the game. I think a lot of time we get frustrated in life, or we get, we start feeling defeated by an enemy, if you will. I'm using quotations if you can't see me, for the enemy. And we start playing their game by their rules. And that's when we lose.
Right, exactly. We go onto ground that we don't understand.
Yep.
Or maybe we only half understand. And by the way, we have no plan. We just go there. Or we act in, and it would have been real easy for Nehemiah. It would be real easy for any leader in this situation to react in a panic. We become reactive rather than proactive. Nehemiah there was proactive. He knew what his boundaries were. He knew what his, well, to use a certain American phraseology, he knew what his Alamo was. He knew the point at which this is the point beyond which I will not go. By the way, Alamos can sometimes be ethical for us in the modern era. Actually, not sometimes. They very often are. All ethical failings, exactly what I said this, all ethical failings come from moral failings first. That's not popular anymore, but it's true. And for leaders, they have to think about this. What's the areas, even at that tactical level, what's the rules you won't break to play the game? And by the way, write that down and be really intentional with it.
I think it comes down to also is not making decisions out of emotion. A lot of times in the moment, we'll make a decision out of emotion, and those usually don't end up well.
Right, exactly. Well, and most, by the way, emotions are valuable. You should feel anger. You should feel happiness. You should feel disgust. You should feel fear. Dance with those things. They're an early warning symbol, right? The last 150 years of the Industrial Revolution is not going to overcome the last millions or thousands or however many years you want to go into of evolution and growth and change at a material level in human beings. It's just not going to do it. No. There's too much biology here. There's just too much, right? But we can overcome our biology, which we're working on that right now in the world. Back to the book, Nehemiah 13, 4 and 5, and then 7 through 10. Again, from the King James Version, last 2 rules. And before this, Eliashib, the priest, having the oversight of the chamber of the house of our God, was allied unto Tobiah. So the person who was supposed to be watching out for the house of God, watching out for the temple, was allied with Nehemiah's, with the leader's enemies. And he had prepared for him a great chamber where aforetime they laid the meat offerings, and they go into what the meat offerings are. I won't read all those off. And I came to Jerusalem and understood of the evil that Eliashib did for Tobiah in preparing him a chamber in the courts of the house of God. And it grieved me sore. Therefore I cast forth all the household stuff of Tobiah out of the chamber. And then he commanded that they clean the chamber, and he invited the Levites back in who had fled to the field, the people who belonged in that space. After he came back from visiting Artaxerxes, he found that the temple was kind of a mess, and he fixed it. When your back is turned as a leader, usurpations will happen if your back is turned. When the cat's away, the mice will play, and it will destroy your projects if you aren't paying attention. That's rule number 6. Use your patience will happen to you as a leader and will destroy your projects if you aren't paying attention. Finally, talking about followers. This is a long piece, Nehemiah chapter 5, 4 and 5, 14 and 15 if you're following along, and then 13:28 from the King James Version Bible. I'm not going to read all of it word for word, but I'll summarize a lot of it by saying this. The people were coming to Nehemiah early, and they were talking about how they had borrowed money for the king's tribute, and that upon our lands and vineyards, they had basically put down credit, and the credit had come due. And so now the king's tribute and the nobles, or not the king's tribute, I'm sorry, the kings and the nobles were coming, and they were demanding the workers' children as slaves. And so it wasn't just, hey, I'm putting down credit so I can go and work on this wall and do good work. I'm also going to give you my kids to be servants and slaves in your household. And the nobles and the kings are like, yeah, sure, because back in the day, having people was a sign of wealth, along with animals and land and a whole bunch of other things. Nehemiah rejects this. He says, moreover, from the time that I was appointed to be their governor in the land of Judah, from the 20th year even unto the 32nd year of Artaxerxes the king, that is 12 years, I and my brethren have not eaten the bread of the governor. We didn't eat from our own people. Our people, to quote from Keith Ferrazzi, our people ate first, and I ate last. This is a principle that I used to walk out when I was leading people in higher education, leading 19 and 20-year-olds, teams of 19 and 20-year-olds. As small as 12, all the way up to as large as 50. And I don't care how big the team is, I'm at the back of the line when it's time to line up for the chow. Jesan eats last. And they never understood that, right? None of my followers ever got that. Matter of fact, many of them were like, Jesan, you should come with the line, or Jesan, you should go first. No, I'm at the back of the line. I eat last.
Can I point something out with that real fast? I love it, just because once again it's another anecdote story of what not to do. I once worked for an organization who had a boss who wasn't the best boss, and this is funny because it's about eating. And we had the boss put on a catering event for all the staff. There was about 200 of us, and the boss was in line first, and she's talking to everybody. And one of my coworkers budged in front of the boss while she was talking to get his meal. The boss asked me, this is a true story, asked me, what is that guy's name? So I told her, I didn't know anything of this. I'm like, oh, it's so-and-so. She fired him a week later. That's an example of how to be a bad boss who eats first. Your story inspired that story inside my head that I remembered of. Sometimes we need to see what a bad example is so we know what the right example is. And that would be a perfect case of a bad example.
Clean house thoroughly. This is rule number 7. Clean house thoroughly. Bad company, like a bad boss, bad leadership, even how a leader leads their family matters. It can corrupt good leadership character. Bad company, even family, can corrupt good leadership character. If you are a leader, you need to be looking at, what are my followers doing? How are the governors behaving? And in this case, in Nehemiah, the governors of Judah. How are my subordinates behaving? And if they're behaving poorly, if they're eating first, if they are eating of the bread of the followers, if they are, as in Nehemiah, taking the labor of the followers and not honoring it, and they expect me to do the same, I have to break that expectation in order to develop good character. And also in order to develop, and not only develop, but also maintain good character. That's a lot of I don't know what's happening there. Okay. when we think about how we engage with leadership, when we think about how we engage with each other around leadership, when we think about what we learn from great books, those 7 rules are a good place to stop.
Mm.
There's a lot more in the book of Nehemiah. It is a robust book. I would encourage you to read it. We've been talking for almost 2.5 hours here, and we've covered a lot. A lot of things to think about, a lot of things to consider. And once again, you don't have to believe in the transcendent nature of a deity to get something out of Nehemiah. Leaders should be open to getting lessons wherever they come from, but in particular, they should be open to getting lessons that come from the foundational books that have formed the civilization that they take for granted. We lead in the West. Now, everybody may not be listening to this in the West, but we lead in the West. We lead in with Western norms. That is a thing worth studying, worth examining, worth digging up, and worth paying attention to. So I want to give Colby an opportunity to talk a little bit about what he's got going on, and then I'll talk a little bit about what I've got going on. And maybe we can all begin to lead. Maybe we can all begin to benefit from leadership in the ways that Nehemiah did.
Yeah. Thank you. And I just wanted to point out my sum up of it is I love Nehemiah because he motivated people from the inside out. He captured hearts of people and he inspired people. So real fast, there's some things I got going on. And I just want to thank you again for having me on your podcast. As Jesan said earlier, I have my own coffee roasting company. It's called Redbeard. So you can find me at redbeard.coffee. I have my own non-for-profit where I do public speaking and programs, and that's at 7miles.org. My TED Talk can be found on YouTube, Becoming a Hope Dealer. And I have a publishing company that I run. It's called Side Hustle Press. And a couple books that I'm working on is I have Charge and Storm books that we talked about that I am in the middle of editing. I also just finished a study book on the book of Ecclesiastes on how to find purpose in life that I'm in the middle of editing. And I'm also editing a book that I finished up during quarantine called I don't know the name of it yet, but it's basically showing the world the real Jesus by increasing your passion for Jesus. And 2 other books that I have published are called Freedom Clause and Hope, Love, plus Freedom. Thanks again for having me on your show, and it's been an inspiration. I'm just a storyteller who loves to inspire people through stories, so thank you.
You're welcome, and you can connect with Colby in all the ways that matter across social media. He's on Instagram, he's on Facebook. I do not believe that he is on Twitter or LinkedIn. Are you on Twitter or on LinkedIn?
I'm on LinkedIn, and I haven't been on Twitter since it went out of style. I'm kidding. Twitter's very relevant.
And check out Colby's TED Talk. It is amazing. Check out Colby's books. Being an author and being a published author is not an easy task. It is a task that requires not only a good dose of entrepreneurship, it also requires a good bit of discipline in order to be a leader. Speaking of discipline, if you want to connect with me, Jesan Sorrells, you can always Google my name, JesanSorrells. You could check out this podcast at www.jesansorrells.com underneath the Leadership Salon tab. If you would like to work with Human Services Consulting and Training, my company that I founded 8 years ago, that currently serves a number of clients as remote, video first, e-learning leadership development, touchless, completely direct to your people. You can check out our live webinar products. You can check out our Leading Keys solution. We love our Leading Keys platform. It's a place for coaching. It's a place for pre-recorded content. It's a place for asynchronous interaction and synchronous interaction. It's also a place where you can go and connect with other leaders. Go and check out our Leading Keys solution at leadingkeys.com. We also offer remote live training services customized for your organization. We can work with you through WebEx, Cisco WebEx, Zoom, GoToMeeting, Skype, whatever you've got in your organization. Myself and our remote trainers, and we have many dedicated and qualified remote trainers who can show up to your organization and lead your teams to be better leaders on things as small as time management, all the way up to things as large as how do we adapt to change? How do we understand volatility and black swans? How do we find a team's zero and how do we adapt? You can check out all of our remote live training services, again, at Human Services at hsconsultingandtraining.com, or you can just Google Human Services Consulting and Training and we pop right up. I do have a book floating around out there just like Colby. You can check it out, Colby, just like on Amazon.com, you can check it out. My Boss Doesn't Care, 100 essays on disrupting your workplace by disrupting your boss. Go check that out. If you want to book me to speak at your live event, if you want to book me to speak at a keynote, if you want to have me come into your organization and do some personalized training for you, if you want to book me for coaching or for anything else, go and check out JesanSorrells.com for speaking and booking. Also, I provide high quality consulting services that are personalized to your organization. So if you're interested in that, please get a hold of me there. Finally, you can check out my other podcast, the Jesan Sorrells Audio Experience on Anchor.fm. And of course, it's everywhere. It's on Spotify, it's on Google Podcasts. Just look for my name. And finally, you can check me out on the Jesan Sorrells Presents YouTube channel, where I do small videos and longer ones about how to be a better leader, how to wade through being a 10-year overnight success, how to actually wrestle with fear, and of course, thinking about the challenges of entrepreneurship and leadership at the dawn of the 21st century. Thank you very much for your time today. Thank you for listening. If leadership were easy, everybody would sign up to do it. However, everybody can be a leader. And at this time, in our world today, all of our problems, or at least almost all of our problems, fundamentally can be solved through the application of effective, intentional leadership. So now that you've taken time to listen to this podcast, I want you to go forth and do something with it.